All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm so excited to be sharing with you all today a talk that is called "Think Like a Journalist," and it is all about the underrated leadership skill of being able to make decisions quickly under pressure. Put some slides up here. I want to start this all by saying I don't like making decisions. And in my ideal state, I think as a human, I would not be making any decisions ever. And I share this as proof that you can become good at making decisions on the fly. I did not know about myself that I hated making decisions when I was 15 and decided to become a journalist, a role that consists primarily of making fast, good decisions under pressure. And when I became a software engineer after several years working as a reporter and news editor, I was ready to leave journalism behind. But the longer I'm in leadership roles where I am the head of a team or helping to make decisions on behalf of a team in a leadership position, the more I realize I actually have an advantage because I use the skills of a journalist to confidently make decisions under pressure, and you can too. So we're going to dive in today. Making a good, quick decision under pressure is an underrated leadership skill. You can actually do more with less by increasing your capacity to handle uncertainty. A lot of the time, we think that making good decisions quickly and under pressure is an innate talent. It's something you're born with, but it is not. It's a skill. A lot of us don't build that skill actively because, well, you kind of have to put yourself into really uncomfortable, high pressure situations in order to learn. Journalists are in those situations all the time. And so they learn to excel at making decisions under pressure because they're constantly facing situations where they don't have all of the information, but it's still their job to make sense of things. So before we can get to the point of actually making better decisions faster, we need to prepare ourselves to make better decisions. So you can visualize it like an iceberg. Making a decision under pressure is just the tip. Underneath that decision is a ton of preparation done in advance to even be able to perform under pressure. So the first thing that journalists do to prepare themselves to make quick decisions on the fly is they get in the right mindset, which is to say they accept reality. They accept that breaking news is going to happen. And by adopting this mindset, journalists can put themselves in a position where they can proactively respond to situations rather than react. And that's a very subtle distinction, but it's really important when it comes to decision making because reacting is what we do on instinct. It's very impulsive or emotional in response to a situation. And what I want us to do, what we need to get good at as leaders, is to be able to actually respond to situations, not react. Responding is much more thoughtful and more deliberate action. Because journalists accept that breaking news is going to happen, I've never actually met a reporter who was unprepared for the news to happen at inconvenient times. And yet I often meet engineering leaders, whether managers or ICs, who are unprepared or underprepared for what they're going to face in the course of their ordinary work. Sometimes that's because we think disruption shouldn't happen, or maybe we think it's our job to prevent disruptions from occurring. But what I see is that a lot of leaders get in this pattern of reacting, not responding, because we think it's our job to prevent things. But if we think about it like a journalist, it is not a journalist's job to prevent the news from occurring, because that would be silly. Their job is to respond well when things happen, gather the necessary information, and create clarity for their readers. So the mindset that I want leaders, engineering leaders, and product leaders to adopt, and it's a hard one, is that it's our job to respond well when unexpected disruptions happen. No matter how well we plan, how carefully we roadmap, and how hard we work, there will inevitably be dumpster fires, and that's okay. And it has to be okay, I think, for unexpected things to happen. If our mindset is that it's not okay for disruptions to occur, we'll only ever experience those things as uncomfortable and bad. And that's not a super helpful position to be in when it comes to responding well. So we need to get comfortable with the idea that it's not actually our job to prevent all disruptions, but rather to mitigate what we can and respond well in the situations that we can't avoid. So once we have accepted that we will be called upon to respond, it's time to start looking at the specific situations that are going to require you to make decisions under pressure. And the thing with making decisions under pressure, it's not often just a single decision, it's multiple decisions in quick succession. And when we have to be making so many decisions quickly, we can actually get decision fatigue and burnout. And so the first step in making better decisions on the fly is to reduce the number of situations that actually do require us to make decisions on the fly. Because when we're highly prepared for what we expect to happen, we'll actually have a little bit more capacity to identify those situations and respond well. So in order to prepare for the disruptions that are likely to occur, it's pretty easy, especially if you're anxious like me. You can just ask yourself, what could possibly go wrong? And it turns out it's quite a lot of things. You could have an outage in production and your product could go down and not be accessible. You could have a new executive come in and steamroll your roadmap with their new initiative. You could lose a key team member. You could have a new team member join. Like I said, I'm very anxious. I've never had trouble coming up with things that could go wrong. If you're not like me, you could encourage your team to run pre-mortems, which are an agile ritual in which you ask your team to put themselves in the position of imagining that the project you've just started has failed. And then you ask them to generate plausible explanations for that failure. And when we do this, we engage a part of our brain, a type of thinking called prospective hindsight, which is absolutely an oxymoron and yet a real thing. But prospective hindsight, this act of imagining in the future and looking back, it makes you 30% more likely to correctly identify the causes of a failure before the failure ever occurs. And if that's not a superpower, I don't know what is. But the idea is not, of course, to just generate the list of things that could go wrong and get overwhelmed by it. The idea is once you have that list, to prioritize the things that are likely to occur and have a big impact if they do. And then you want to plan for how you'll respond in those situations. Figure out how to proactively monitor for those risks so you can see them coming, and then know how you're going to respond in that situation ahead of time. So this brings us to the tip of the iceberg. We've looked at a couple of things that we can do in advance to prepare ourselves for making better decisions. And when you plan in advance, you're priming your brain to deal with curveballs. And the better equipped you are to deal with any one type of curveball, the better equipped you'll be at handling any type of curveball. Which brings us to the moment of making a quick, informed decision under pressure. What is going to be really critical for everyone to remember when it comes to making decisions under pressure is that in those situations, you are not going to have all of the information. And that's okay. And the good news is that in those situations, more information about the event that is occurring is not actually what matters, which is good because you're not going to have that information anyway. So let's look at this through, of course, the lens of a journalist. A journalist uses a classic news writing format called an inverted pyramid. An inverted pyramid prioritizes starting with the broadest, most relevant information up top, your who, what, when, where, why, how of the event. And then it brings in more and more specific information the deeper into the story you read. And this allows a reader to get the essential context of what's happening within just a few paragraphs. And then they move to what that event actually means a little bit later in the story. This is a holdover from the days of print journalism when a story would be printed on, let's say, A1, the first page, and then jump and be continued at a later point in the story. A journalist couldn't rely on a reader to get to the entire end of the story. And I guess you still can't rely on a reader to reach the end of a story. And so they front load the story with the most important stuff up front. So let's take a look at what this looks like in practice. This is an example of a story from the New York Times last year about the Louisiana governor's election last October. And in the first paragraph, it's just the facts. It's all business. It gives you the key details about what happened, but you'll notice that those are very, very broad. When we get to the second paragraph, we get a few additional details, some additional context that this was a jungle primary, that Mr. Landry is brash, and that this result was unexpected to political watchers. We get additional context about the previous governor as well. And then in the third paragraph, we get even more specific about what this means for Louisiana. And so in just 3 paragraphs, the reporter has gone from telling us about the thing that is happening to what it means for Louisiana and why it matters. Now, this story actually did go on past 3 paragraphs. It went on for quite a while, but these 3 paragraphs were a great example of kind of that inverted pyramid news format, going from the thing that is happening to why it matters. So this is exactly the way that things happen in the context of a product or an engineering team as well. When we make decisions in this context, I want us to think like journalists and start to gather information across multiple possible contexts. So often, we get caught up in the moment with the thing that is happening, the details of the specific situation itself. And the problem is that in the moment, more details about the thing itself might not be available. And so what I see leaders do is start to brainstorm and spin their wheels and come up with possible approaches. And again, the problem is not that these approaches are good or bad, but that we don't have enough information to know which is the best. And what happens is that we hesitate to commit to something because we're afraid of being wrong, which delays our ability to make a decision and then heightens the impact of being wrong. So what we end up doing most of the time is we go with an option that I like to call panic silently and wait, which of course you'll notice panicking silently is a choice. It is a choice that we can make. However, I would like to unblock us. And I would like us to unblock ourselves in the decision-making process by starting to layer in additional information that narrows down the feasible options. To do this, we are going to use the inverted pyramid, and we are going to dig in deep. So of course, in the moment, we have the thing that is happening, the event itself, but then there are these other contexts that we can layer into our decision-making process to help ourselves get more information and narrow down the options. So for example, you might dig into your team context. Who are the people that you have on your team? What are their skill sets? Is anyone looking for a growth opportunity? How do they feel about disruptions? Knowing the team that you have around you is a great way to start to think about the possible approaches, because if you don't have the right people, that might narrow down certain options. Going a level deeper into the organizational context, we can ask ourselves, what are my company goals? What are the metrics that matter? What is the most important thing to the company at this time? What are my boss's expectations? And this starts to help us narrow down even further. But the fourth and most important context, I think, is the one that we tend to ignore in decision-making because we wish it weren't there. We wish it weren't a factor. But that is your personal context, because you are also involved in this situation and in making the decision. You need to consider, what are your obligations and what matters to you? What choice can you sustain? So many times I have tried to make decisions without considering my own ability and energy levels. And let me tell you, that way lies burnout. So we want to make sure that we're including ourselves in assessing the context in any given situation to ensure that we're pursuing an option that is going to resonate with our values and what we can sustain. So when you do this, when you think in this way and go below the surface of what's happening, you can start to move from a really broad list of all possible approaches in response to a situation to a short list of feasible approaches given the context. And when you do this, evaluate your options based on the deeper context of what actually matters, you might find that you have several good options. And if you're like me, you might find that it's frustrating because it would be really handy to just be able to narrow down in every situation to one right answer. What I have learned about making decisions is that when you do this contextual assessment and think about decisions in this way, you will often come up with multiple options that are valid and feasible. You can confidently choose any of those options because you know that they're all super informed by the deeper context in which you operate. You're not just responding to the thing itself, but to the context in which you're operating. So in conclusion, I want us to remember it is okay to be wrong when it comes to making high pressure decisions. We're human. We're only ever going to be able to make the best decision we can with the information we have. The good news is that when we start making decisions faster, we can monitor across all of the contexts and know that if any one of them changes, if we get more information about that thing that's happening, we can take a moment to revisit our decision and make a change. When we commit early, the stakes are going to be much, much lower. The impact of being wrong about any one thing is going to be quite low. So I have 3 takeaways for you today. The first is my hope that you will accept reality, that disruptions are going to occur and it's okay when they do, because we're going to be prepared for the ones that we're most likely to face. We're going to have thought about how we want to respond. And of course, in the moment, when you're in a completely unexpected high pressure situation, you can use the inverted pyramid to think about digging below the surface and getting more context to inform your decision. So on that note, I would love to take some of your questions. I'll stop sharing here. We'll see if anyone has any questions about thinking like a journalist and making great decisions under pressure. Okay, so we have a question from Yvette. Yvette asks, how do you stay in that mindset? I would do this at work, prepare for incidents and scenarios. However, sometimes I can get comfortable and not be at the ready. That is such a great question. I think that this is really going to depend on how you work best. I have a bunch of sticky notes on my computer, on my desktop, that I look at constantly to help remind me to take a breath and pause in a given situation. So you can start with this in a really low pressure, low stakes situation, like a team meeting. And you can ask yourself, what do I need to consider about what I'm going to experience here in this meeting? And getting in the habit of doing that before meetings, before low pressure meetings, can help you then build the skill of doing it before the big high pressure meetings. Great. Okay, we've got another question from Suma. Suma says, how to convince people to follow the most feasible solution when too many people are brainstorming? That's a great question. So I actually didn't have a chance to talk about this, but one of the skills that journalists use is they cultivate multiple modes of writing and telling stories. They have a mode that is reserved for when they're on assignment, when there is kind of much less pressure and they're focused on digging deep, getting all the answers. Then they have a mode for breaking news, which is what they shift into when one of those unexpected things happens. And that's the mode where they know, okay, I need to be more aggressive. I need to be really scrappy in collecting information, and I need to be fast. And so I think as engineering leaders, we can do that too. And so what I like to do is, or what I call it is my scrappy mode and my scale mode. So my scale mode is how I lead when I'm in a business as usual situation, when I'm just in a regular kind of sprint planning or sprint cadence at work. And the scrappy mode is for when shit hits the fan. It's for when things go wrong. And I think in those moments when things are going wrong, as an engineering manager, it's really tempting to still want to be empowering and to be including more voices and get more people involved in the brainstorm. But that's the moment when you, as the leader, need to be much more kind of aggressive in how you're communicating and setting the tone for the team's focus. So in those situations, I really view it as the role of the team manager or leader to set the expectations about what the team should be doing. And so if it's time to stop brainstorming, I think it's your role as a leader to make a call and commit to the approach. All right, we have another question. For people who are honest but who make terrible decisions, what advice do you have to give them to see the truth of life more clearly? For example, a young adult can believe the world is more positive and miss that things are not as they are. How does one overcome this dualistic society of featuring what is good and bad and vice versa? I would say it's really important to remember that as humans, we attach meaning to the things that happen. But things that are happening, when we think about breaking news, is neither good or bad. It just is. And so releasing ourselves from the pressure that things have to go right is going to allow us to accept that those uncomfortable and disruptive moments are going to occur and that it's not bad when they do. We just get to leverage a different set of skills. It's an opportunity to test ourselves, to step outside of where we're comfortable when those really complex or challenging situations occur. Great. Yvette asks about the artwork behind me. I am so proud of this artwork. It's a moment to shout out my wonderful husband, Pat. He is an abstract artist. He actually is the one who also taught me how to code when I was just getting started. But they're a set of 9 pieces of art that he made for me behind me. Okay, and then I'll take one last question just so that we have a chance to trickle out and get into the waiting rooms for our next set of speakers. The last question is, how do you assign probability to the items of possible disruptions in advance so you don't have an endless list? Endless list. That's also a good question. Let's say you run a pre-mortem with your team. You've generated a bunch of options. The first thing that I would do if I'm working in a group with my team is do a round of voting. And I would let the members of my team actually be the ones to vote and assess things for how bad they would be if they occurred. And you'll start to get kind of almost like a heat map of where the votes are, kind of in the sense that more votes means we think something is more likely and more impactful. And that's where you start in terms of making your plan, is like start with the catastrophic worst case scenario things, and then work your way to the things that if they did happen, yeah, that would be inconvenient, but we could figure it out. And so you want to focus on the things where it's like, this would be a huge huge disruption. It would really change the kind of the way that our team is operating. Those are the things that you want to kind of have a plan and have a almost a run book for handling, so that you know how to respond, so that you don't have to, like, when something happens, you don't have to think, oh shit, and like have to get in the mode. You can be like, no, I have a plan for this. Let me pull up that page in Notion where I wrote down what I was going to do. And you can just then run your playbook, which of course it always goes a little bit different than you anticipated, but you're going to be able to handle those situations because you have planned in advance. All right, I'm going to wrap things up here. Thank you to everyone who joined. I'm sharing a link in the chat for everyone to a post on this topic on Medium that I wrote. It's going to have my slides and much of the content, as well as some additional tips and tricks that I didn't have time for today. So thank you everyone so much. I really enjoyed having the chance to share on this topic that I love. Thanks everyone.